What if the most American rock band of the late 60s wasn't psychedelic at all? What if they changed music not by getting bigger and louder, but by getting shorter, sharper, and truer? Before stadium Heartland and alt-country radio, there was Creedence Clearwater Revival. They didn't just make songs, they rewired how songs worked. 3 minutes, no fat, hooks that hit like headlines, a rasp that sounded like a working engine. While San Francisco was floating, CCR was marching straight into jukeboxes, factory break rooms, and the front lines of American life. If you've ever felt a chorus grab your collar in under 10 seconds, you've felt their blueprint. But here's the question I want you to hold. How did four guys from California become the sound of a mythic American South? And why did that illusion feel more honest than the real thing? Stay with me. CCR's records landed like urgent letters. Proud Mary, Bad Moon Rising, Fortunate Son, songs that moved like riverboats and sirens. They were danceable protests and portable stories, built for AM radio and Friday night bars, for parades and picket lines. And yet, the band that wrote the soundtrack to a country at war was quietly fighting its own war behind the scenes. Here's the twist. This wasn't supposed to work in 1969. The album era said, stretch out. CCR said, say it, sing it, and get out. And the world couldn't stop replaying them. They turned roots music into mass communication. They made the single powerful again. But there was a cost. Control. Contracts. Brothers and bandmates pulling in different directions. Imagine writing songs so unmistakable that later a courtroom would ask whether you'd plagiarized yourself. Imagine headlining the era's biggest festival and barely existing in the movie that defined it. How does a band that big get written out of the picture and still become the picture? Hold that thought, because the story of CCR is also the story of America arguing with itself. Class, war, escape, work, the dream of motion. Their music made people move, onto dance floors, into streets, down highways, across rivers in their minds. And that's why this matters now. In a world that scrolls past everything, CCR proved that a song, clean and clear, can still stop time. Over the next chapters, we'll go where the headlines don't, into the garages and contracts, into the bayous that existed only on tape, into the studio habits that made a 3-minute track feel like a lifetime. We'll ask why Fortunate Son keeps roaring back every time power gets too comfortable. We'll see how a band that skipped the long solo changed rock, country, punk attitude, and the entire Americana playbook. And then we'll pull the thread almost nobody talks about, the decisions that shrunk their legend on film while expanding it on radio, the legal fights that caged their own sound, and the late life turn that finally put their songs back in the hands of their author. So here's your curiosity gap. If CCR mastered the art of saying more with less, what did they leave unsaid? And why did that silence echo for decades? Roll with me to Chapter 1. The Counter-Psychedelic Sound, How 3 Minutes Beat the Age of Excess. In 1967-1968, San Francisco's sound stretched out. Light shows, incense, 10-minute guitar voyages at the Fillmore, the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, Quicksilver Messenger Service, long jams, long hair, long nights. On FM, the new underground DJs let songs breathe forever. On AM, Top 40 still prized the 2 to 3 minute single. The city felt like a carnival and a classroom at once. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across the bay in El Chorrito, the radio didn't sound like a kaleidoscope. It sounded like work. Tight drums, clipped guitars, voices that cut through traffic and factory noise. America was living a pressure cooker, Vietnam draft notices in mailboxes, protest marches on the evening news, assassinations in 1968, cost of living rising, neighborhoods splitting along class lines. People needed songs that hit fast, told the truth, and got back to the job. Hold that sound in your head. Now add the river, not a real one they grew up on, but the one they imagined from 45s and jukeboxes, muddy, humid, always rolling. That's where Creedence Clearwater Revival steps in. 4 kids who came up on Little Richard shouts, Sun Records slapback, stack strut, New Orleans shuffle, and the tight grammar of AM radio. While the scene around them went long and trippy, they went short, sharp, and rootsy. Swamp rock boiled down to 3-minute missiles. Here's the piece almost everyone misses. CCR didn't fall out of a label meeting. They were built in California garages, school gyms, and cheap studios years before anyone knew the name. The parts were already dangerous. The pieces before the legend. John Fogerty, lead vocal, lead guitar, songwriter, was the engine. Berkeley born, El Chorrito raised. He had a voice like sandpaper on oak and a head wired to edit. Ideas came in full color, then he carved them down to headlines and hooks. As a kid, he worshipped the loudest 45s in the stack, Bo Diddley's stomp, Howlin' Wolf's growl, Dale Hawkins' Susie Q. He learned early that groove plus clarity equals power. Tom Fogerty, older brother, rhythm guitar, brought steadiness and weight. He'd been the front man first, leading early gigs and keeping the circle together when life pulled it apart. Tom's rhythm wasn't flashy, it was structural. Take it away, and the house leaned. Stu Cook, bass, was the translator between R&B feel and rock drive. He wasn't there to solo, he was there to lock. You can hum half the bass lines on CCR records because they're part of the hook. Doug Cosmo Clifford, drums, kept everything marching. No circus fills, no drum solos. The kick and snare move like a work shift, on time, unromantic, unstoppable. The DIY grind. Before Creedence, there were the Blue Velvets, teenagers learning to sound like their record collections. Then the Gollywogs in the mid-'60s, cutting rough singles while learning how studios really work. They rehearsed in basements, garages, anywhere neighbors wouldn't call the cops. They played East Bay teen centers, VFW halls, small clubs where the beer smell stayed in your clothes 2 days. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across town, bands with less discipline but better connections were getting studio budgets to chase the psychedelic wave. The CCR guys were punching clocks, taking reserve service commitments, and grabbing studio time when they could afford it. The gap between dream and daylight was real. Then a turn. Fantasy Records in San Francisco gives them a path. But this isn't a fairy tale. It's small money, big expectations, and even bigger arguments about sound, control, and names. When John returns from military reserve duty, he's sharper, more intense, and more certain. The road out is songs, not solos. The first national crack is their long, swampy cover of Susie Q in 1968, a rare extended cut for them. But a calling card, that voice, those guitars, that Bayou by Imagination mood. After one late 1968 studio marathon, the room tilted. The first time they stretched Dale Hawkins's Susie Q into a swampy 8-minute trance, people stopped talking. It didn't sound like a new act. It sounded like a weapon built for underground FM. John Fogerty had deliberately made it long to catch the ear of San Francisco's freeform stations, and it worked. Within weeks, CCR had their first national hit, peaking at number 11 on the Hot 100. Freeze the frame. Listen to that tremolo and dry snare one more time. This is the entry wound. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across town, the album side epic was the fashion. CCR's shockwave wasn't length, it was clarity. The next move was shorter, meaner, and unmistakable. Proud Mary. In January 1969, the single stormed to number 2, announcing a band that could compress myth into 3 minutes. Riverboats, motion, work, escape, no filler, all signal. Numbers don't tell it. This clip does. The riff lands by bar 2 and the chorus feels like you've always known it. From there, the detonation sequence is ridiculous. Bad Moon Rising, Green River, Down on the Corner, Fortunate Son, 1969 into 1970, like a string of M80s on the charts and on the street. Kids got it first. They could dance to it, shout to it, and get the message without a lecture. Papers and some tastemakers sometimes heard a problem. Square, too blunt, too blue-collar next to the cosmically hip. But that tension only sharpened the edges of the songs. Hold that sound in your head. Now add language, plain words, no varnish. Fortunate Son wasn't an essay, it was a siren. Released as the flip to Down on the Corner, it still muscled into the top 40 first. 2 minutes and change of class rage aimed at privilege dodging the draft. A B-side that behaved like an A-bomb. The kids heard the future, the papers heard a problem. Freeze the frame again. Why did this hit so hard on both AM and FM? Because CCR's protest lived in the groove. The formula, plain language plus relentless backbeat, made dissent portable. Trucks, factories, parades, picket lines. It's why newsreel of 6970 seems to lip-sync to that snare. The song moved bodies and moved minds. Contrast cut. Where Fortunate Son punched, Proud Mary floated, mythic Americana that could travel across scenes and cultures. Proof? Ike and Tina Turner detonated their own version in 1971, Slow Burn to Explosion, Grammy in 1972, and a new life for the song as a soul rock showpiece. CCR wrote tunes so sturdy they could change clothes and still outrun the radio. And then the backlash landed. Not from fans, stadiums were roaring, but from the culture referees who liked their art either clever or cosmic. CCR insisted on workmanlike. 2 minutes, say the thing, get out. Even as they outsold giants in '69, the too simple, too square tag lingered in print, right up until those same critics had to admit the songs wouldn't die. The liftoff is complete by late '69, a band that sounds like a headline and reads like a postcard of America. Sirens, rivers, back porches, factory whistles. On stage, it's tighter. On vinyl, it's drier. On radio, it's everywhere. AM programmers love the runtime. FM DJs love the attitude. This is how a flare becomes a flag. If the hits came from subtraction, no solos, no haze, how did CCR turn that discipline into a mythic America they'd never lived in? And why did millions swear it felt like home? Next up, Chapter 3, Myth-Making Americana from a California Garage. They weren't selling psychedelia, they were selling permission. Permission to be loud and clear and done by the 3rd minute. Creedence Clearwater Revival looked like they just clocked off a shift. Plaid shirts, denim, work boots, hair that didn't need a wind machine. No capes, no glitter, no smoke bombs. The myth wasn't costume, it was attitude. We show up, we tune up, we play songs that stick. Parents called it rough. Kids copied it because it felt like real life. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across America, the cool look was getting taller and trippier. CCR's move was the other direction, back porch and bar band tough. And that's the first controversy. How did 4 Californians become the soundtrack to a mythic South, steam, mud, riverboats, without faking accents or dressing like riverboat captains? Answer, they built a cinematic America out of the records they loved. They wrote landscapes you could hear. Culture shock. Hold that sound in your head. Now add radio. The album era said stretch. CCR made the 3-minute single cool again. DJs loved them. Hard in, hard out, headline-ready choruses. That discipline nudged formats. Suddenly, the AM dial wasn't just novelty and bubblegum, it had teeth. On the street, CCR changed behavior more than fashion. Friday night bars and VFW halls became sing-back rooms. Guys who didn't dance moved to the backbeat anyway. Writers and zine editors who didn't buy the spiritual trip still respected the clarity. The band's myth was that you could cut through any scene with a good riff and a clean story. That idea outlived the tie-dye. Freeze the frame. There's another shock. Woodstock. They played it. They were tight. And then, the footage didn't make the original 1970 film. Some scheduling and sound issues, some band pride about not looking their best. The result? A generation that learned Woodstock from the movie didn't see CCR at all. Think about the paradox. One of the biggest bands of the moment missing from the most famous document of the moment. Yet the songs still bulldozed the culture. If anything, it hardened the image. Not festival mystics, radio killers. The craft, why it still hits. They weren't just selling music, they were selling permission. True, but strip the tabloids away, and the secret weapon is the machine. 4 parts that only work together. Solo the drums, hear what Cosmo's doing under the vocal. The hi-hat is dry, the snare is flat and mean. The fills are short on purpose. No fireworks, no triplets for applause. It's timekeeping as a moral choice. The groove says, focus. That's why the songs feel urgent even at medium tempo. One studio trick you can't unhear after this. The drums sound close, like the kit is in your garage. No echo chamber to pretty it up. That dryness makes every lyric feel like a statement, not a suggestion. Now, solo the bass. Stu Cook draws rectangles you can walk on, root-heavy, repeating patterns that become the song's spine. He's not climbing for attention. He's drawing lanes for the vocal and guitar to drive in. Listen to how often the bass mirrors the kick drum. That lock is where the push-pull lives. When the chorus lands, it feels automatic because the foundation hasn't budged for 2 verses. Bring up Tom Fogerty's rhythm. That's the heat you don't notice until it's gone. He sits right on Cosmo's right hand, strumming like a metronome with attitude. He's carving out a pocket that lets the lead guitar stab without turning to mush. Pull Tom out, and everything sounds busier but smaller. The song loses its wall. Now the lead guitar and voice, John's domain. The riffs are telegraphic, 2 or 3 notes that behave like logos. Think about it. CCR riffs are brand marks. You recognize them before the lyric arrives. The tone is amp tremolo and edge of breakup, recorded dry so the attack stays sharp. Producer-engineer trick, keep the guitars front and tight, pan rhythms to widen, and resist reverb so the vocal reads like print. It's newspaper mix logic, headlines in bold, subheads clean, no decorative fonts. The vocal is a character, rasp that sits on top of the beat, clipping syllables like they cost money. There's almost no melisma. When he holds a note, it's for pressure, not polish. The lyric voice? Plain speech upgraded to poetry by image and motion, rivers, trains, weather, work. He rarely gets abstract. The point is always in the first line, the picture in the second. Harmony moves, sparse and functional. When they stack vocals, it's to thicken the hook, not show choir blend. Listen to those doubles. Often it's John doubling himself tight and close-mic'd so the grit reinforces the grit. And that's why copycats never quite felt right. Plenty tried to swamp rock their way onto the charts, but they missed the subtraction. CCR's thing isn't rootsy plus jam. It's edit the jam out. Leave what delivers the message. If a part doesn't move the lyric forward or stamp the rhythm harder, it dies on the studio floor. That's also why the songs age well in playlists next to modern acts. The mixes are uncluttered and the transients snap. Myth versus reality, and why both worked. Parents complained. Too loud, too blunt, too blue-collar angry. Critics sniffed. Too simple, not progressive. Kids heard permission. Wear what you own. Play what you can play well. Don't apologize for short. Don't apologize for clear. That became a cultural pathway for Heartland rock, alt-country, even punk's no-solo, all-song ethos. The myth said you could build a national feeling from a garage. The craft proved it. Riffs, rhythms, voice, and ruthless editing. Quick reality check. Numbers don't tell it. The clips do. Cue any live cut from 69, 70. The count-off is a gunshot. The song starts at conversational volume, and by bar 16, the crowd is a choir. That's not mysticism. That's arrangement. Verse is short, chorus early, bridge like a pressure valve, then out. Radio loves it. Audiences memorize it. Bands study it. One last studio trick you can't unhear. Listen to the guitars and drums during a verse, then the chorus. The band doesn't get much louder. It gets clearer. The picking opens. The snare flattens a hair more. The bass pushes the root on the one. It's psychological volume, impact without turning the knobs. Each member is essential. Pull Cosmo and the time slouches. Pull Stu and the melody has no spine. Pull Tom and the room gets thin and topply. Pull John and, well, the system loses its engineer, editor, and spark. CCR is not a sound you can assemble from hired guns. It's a fit, four corners that square the frame. Controversy that fed the image. And yes, there were bands and beefs. Anti-war lyrics that rattled gatekeepers. Sniffs from tastemakers who wanted 12-minute journeys, not 2-minute verdicts. The band's refusal to indulge celebrity rituals read as arrogance to some, discipline to others. But that friction sharpened the edge. CCR as an opposition party to rock success. Why it still hits. Because the songs obey two laws. Tell me what it is, and make my body believe you. A CCR track says the thing in the first line and proves it with the drum and bass. That's why movie supervisors reach for them. That's why stadiums still roar to them. That's why kids who've never seen a river understand rollin' on. So if the myth was clean and the craft was ruthless, why did the inside of the machine start grinding? Contracts, credit, control, and the court case where a songwriter was accused of sounding too much like himself? Roll into Chapter 4. The warning label, contracts, control, and the I sued myself era. Behind the posters was a price tag: sleep, blood, sanity. From 1969 through 1971, Creedence were a machine. Records, radio, tours, repeat. When the adrenaline faded, the math didn't. Miles on the road, studio deadlines, and a label calling for more. What began as discipline hardened into pressure. Who writes, who decides, who gets paid, who gets heard. We're going to sit with this for a second. Grind math. The schedule was relentless. 5-hit LPs in about 2 years, a run of singles and tours that kept the engine hot, but the people inside it overheating. Creative control clustered around John Fogerty. The results were undeniable, but the resentment built. Inside the office, there was Fantasy Records and Saul Zentz, where contracts and authorship control would become the storm that outlived the band. The tension didn't evaporate. It compounded. Listen to how the tempo feels heavier now. Human hits. The first crack is Family. Tom Fogerty, older brother, rhythm anchor, leaves in early 1971, wanting more voice and less veto. A brother walking out changes chemistry you can't replace with overdubs. The three who remain, John, Stu Cook, Doug Cosmo Clifford try to redistribute writing and singing on Mardi Gras, 1972. On paper, it's democratic. In practice, it's an album made under duress, with everyone second-guessing everyone and a band already grieving what they'd been. Most acts fade. Creedence didn't fade. They ended. That's why the legend froze young instead of growing safe. Quick reality check. This is the part fans don't put on t-shirts. Lawyers, letters, pride. Old friendships turn into depositions. By late 1972, after a short, unhappy tour, CCR disbands. People would spend decades arguing who broke it and why. The paper trail says contracts, credits, and control were the accelerants. The end, in plain sight freeze, the frame on the Mardi Gras sessions. Tom is gone. Roles are blurred. Trust is thin. John contributes fewer originals. Stu and Cosmo carry songs they never planned to carry. The trio dynamic exposes how much of Creedence's magic depended on a very specific fit. One member leaves, and everything that felt effortless starts to grind its gears. A few months after release, the deal is over. The name Creedence Clearwater Revival becomes an argument, not a band. After the fall, the courtroom years. Now the room gets colder. John Fogerty's refusal to sing CCR songs live becomes a wound fans can hear. Part of it is pain. Part of it is money. Performing the old hits meant enriching the people he was fighting. The ugliest chapter arrives in 1988, when Fantasy sues John for plagiarizing himself, claiming his solo hit, The Old Man Down the Road, copied CCR's Run Through the Jungle. Imagine being hauled into court to prove you didn't steal your own voice. A jury vindicates him. The case becomes a landmark artists still cite when talking about owning your style. We're going to sit with this for a second. The long shadow winning a case doesn't mean you get your life back. For years, Fogerty lived estranged from his own catalog, financially and emotionally, watching some uses of CCR songs he hated and could not stop. The fight ate time, joy, and health. Then a late turn. In January 2023, he finally regains control over his CCR songwriting rights, a closure half a century in the making. The healing isn't theoretical, it's practical. He starts re-recording the classics, not to erase the past, but to own his work going forward, an album project now known as Legacy. The Creedence Clearwater Revival Years. At 80, he's cutting with his sons, turning scars into songs. Listen to how the tempo feels heavier, and then lighter. Before Creedence, American rock radio swung between bubblegum and cosmic trips. After them, everybody chased clarity. 3 minutes, no fat, hooks like headlines. Even artists who never studied the name live in the echo. Tight drums, plain-spoken lyrics, riffs that brand themselves in 2 notes. Influence map. Spot the lineage. Spot the lineage. Hear Springsteen do CCR's No BS Heartland directness. Hear alt-country trim the twang for song-first storytelling. Hear punk's brevity ethos. Say it, shout it, get out. That same spine runs through the Americana revival. Groove first, truth second, everything else later. Rolling Stone has long traced this web, from Heartland rock to modern Americana, back to Creedence's radio-length discipline. Afterlife, covers, screens. Billions One. Sample you've heard 1,000 times is actually a placement. Fortunate Son under newsreels, sports hype, and war montages, because it still reads like a 2-minute siren. The Library of Congress literally put it in the National Recording Registry for its cultural impact. Contrast the other pillar, Proud Mary. CCR wrote it. Ike and Tina Turner turned it into a soul rock showpiece, charting top 5 and winning a Grammy, proof these songs were built to travel across styles and generations. Numbers don't tell everything, but listen. In the streaming era, CCR are still among the most played 60s bands. Recent reporting even places them just behind the Beatles in monthly listeners, half a century after the breakup. Receipts keep coming. Bad Moon Rising entered Spotify's Billions Club, a 1969 single joining the modern hit parade. And the covers keep the flame. Pearl Jam have roared Fortunate Son on stages for decades. U2 cut a studio version during the Rattle and Hum era and released it in the early 90s. CCR's protest language, spoken through new mouths. Why now? What a 2025 listener hears that 198X didn't quick reality check. Today's feeds are loud, busy, and long. CCR feels new again because the records are uncluttered. Dry drums, bass with a job, rhythm like a wall, vocal like a bulletin. On a phone speaker, that mix punches where lush productions smear. On playlists, their concision wins the skip war. How to start listening. Gateway path. 3 steps. Freeze the frame, start here. Song, Fortunate Son. 2 minutes of class rage with a marching snare. Hear how the groove carries the protest. The Library of Congress album, Cosmos Factory. The full grammar of CCR in one place. Chugel, ballad, stomp, and that newsroom mix. Rolling Stone Australia cover. Conversation, play. CCR's Proud Mary, then Ike and Tina's. Feel how a great song survives a costume change. Personal close. The handoff. They weren't just selling music, they were selling permission to be clear, fast, and fearless in public. If you were there, you already knew. If you weren't, now you do. Your turn. What was the first CCR moment that hit you in the chest? Riff, lyric, or drum crack? Drop it below. I'll pin the best picks into our rock lore. Creedence Starter Playlist. Okay, your pick goes in the pinned playlist. This is Rock Lore. Subscribe so this history doesn't get erased by the algorithm, and hit the next episode where we trace how a band that skipped the long solo rewired American radio, then follow the thread into the Heartland rock boom that took their blueprint to stadiums.